You, yes, you, among potentially billions of others, have been sorely lied to about how plastic waste is currently managed. You have been told that if you diligently recycle all of your plastic waste as a consumer, all of that waste will be recycled. As it stands, the numbers simply don't match the claims of those promoting recycling in the current context. Right now, only 9% of global plastic waste is recycled and 22% is classed as mismanaged, according to the OEDC. Most plastic waste today ends up either in landfill or is incinerated for energy. Some, inevitably, ends up in the environment. Ocean plastics are an infamous example. But, at the same time, plastics are an integral part of modern technology and play a vital role in modern life. From containers to engineering parts and electronics to prosthetics and medical equipment and much more, we use plastics in many aspects of our daily lives. With humanity so reliant on plastics to maintain a high standard of living, it may seem like plastic waste is an insurmountable issue. There are solutions we can implement to mitigate the problem, but these won't come without the need to drastically change our relationship with our resources, as we will discuss. Are plastics inherently the issue? And can recycling be part of the solution? As with many things, the answer is complicated. If you want a greater understanding of the issue at hand and want to know how we can really tackle plastic waste and waste in general, then stay tuned as we deep dive into the issue of recycling and ways to improve the practice. Let's get this out of the way. Recycling is much better than not recycling. We are very good at recycling many things, like cardboard, aluminium and other metals, and glass. This saves a ton of mining and continued exploitation of the Earth's resources. It's much better for the environment and much less effort to give already used resources a new lease of life than extract new ones, especially in the case of metals. It's quite energy intensive, yes, and that's an issue we can solve with things like renewables. However, that's still preferable over extracting virgin resources. The problems with recycling mainly centre around plastic. Because we live in a profit-driven global economy, and by extension a market economy, the things companies want to recycle are materials with relatively high value. Gold, platinum, steel, nickel, silver, mainly metals. What about lower value materials like glass, you may ask? Glass is, in essence, dead easy to recycle. The process for its recycling isn't too dissimilar to how it's made originally, so there's no real difference in cost. Plastic, on the other hand, is a very different ballgame. Like glass, most plastic waste today falls under the umbrella of thermoplastics, which in plain English means they can be melted down and made into something new. However, that's about where the similarities end and the complications begin. The first hurdle we come across with recycling plastic, before we even get into the technical details, is the economics of plastic recycling. Simply put, as it stands under our current capitalist socio-economic model, it is simply cheaper in money terms to produce virgin plastics than to recycle them. A kind of hard problem in this regard is the fact that recycling involves many more processes to yield a similar amount of usable material than making plastics from scratch. Recycling plastics involves washing, separation, often bleaching, then melting and pelletizing, and so on and so forth. All these steps are inevitably part of any recycling process that yields materials of a high enough quality. Add on top of that the fact that despite many plastics having relatively good properties, strength, durability, etc., as it stands they are seen as low value commodities, and many businesses consider plastic recycling to be not worth the bother. New plastic is cheaper, recycled plastic is more expensive in money terms, and takes more work and energy to produce. In this marketized society, plastic waste is something simply no one wants to deal with, which is why many countries send their plastic waste overseas, where they are stored in large warehouses and eventually are dumped either into landfill or cast into the environment. So the first thing we need to tackle is the economics of recycling plastic. Let's start by talking about oil, specifically transitioning away from it, and how recycling plastic could become more of a necessity. Yes, it's happening far too slowly, but the world is nevertheless transitioning away from fossil fuels towards alternatives like renewables, nuclear, etc. Most plastics were, once in their lifetime, smaller molecules in a black, tarry, organic molecule soup known as crude oil. The lighter stuff was likely siphoned off and used for energy and fuel, while the byproducts of this were converted into plastics of various types, which is something we will touch on soon. Everything was hunky-dory until we discovered that the release of CO2 into the atmosphere was causing the Earth's average temperature to increase, via an increase in the greenhouse effect. Most scientists now recognise the need to transition away from burning fossil fuels for energy, and so with it we need to transition away from virgin petroleum-based plastics. While bioplastics are often promoted as an alternative, they also come with their own problems, such as diverting resources away from growing food for their feedstocks. A possible workaround for this is to only use waste products for bioplastic production, although I'm not sure how scalable this would be, or whether it would be adequate to meet demand. The process of recycling is energy and work intensive. However, there's one reason why, in the context of transitioning to a society that wants to create as much abundance as possible, we should absolutely be recycling every bit of waste plastic we can. It's, well, absolutely everywhere. As I said before, many plastics are strong, durable materials that can serve a variety of uses, and for better or for worse, there is a lot of perfectly usable plastic scattered about the earth as litter, landfill, e-waste, and no doubt in other forms. It's certainly bad that it's there to begin with, but it creates an opportunity to put an uncountable supply of wasted resources back into service. If we were, in the future, to make a conscious effort to collect and recycle plastics wherever possible, we would be solving a double issue. We would be cleaning up the earth that gives us and other beings life, while also providing an abundant supply of strong, versatile materials ready to be employed in a litany of applications. Something I wanted to touch upon is the source of plastic waste and how we can manage that. The vast majority of plastic waste, some recyclable, some not, is single-use plastic. These are things like shopping bags, soft drink bottles, cling film, and so on. While many so-called single-use plastics can be reprocessed, not all can, and so for single-use applications, we should be looking at alternatives such as glass bottles and card cups for beverages, and things like paper and proven biodegradable polymers for food packaging. However, for what we can recycle, it would be beneficial to repurpose recyclable single-use plastics into long-term use materials. This is indeed possible, as we see with tinkerers who have taken plastic bottles, recycled them into 3D printer filament, and made useful functional parts that will serve a longer life than their single-use cousins. This, again, would reduce the scarcity of engineering materials while cleaning up the environment in the process. I'm going to address this before I continue any further. I have a whole separate video dedicated to discussing microplastics and what we can do about them. But, to recap, microplastics are particles that are 5mm in size or less. Most microplastics are loose fibres from things like polyester clothing, but modern recycling processes also release a significant amount of microplastics due to the necessary washing step. Some things we can do to mitigate their release are to filter out fibres from laundry wastewater, and for recycling we could distill wastewater or use techniques like reverse osmosis to remove even the smallest microplastic particles. Now, to get back on track, I wanted to talk about something closely related to the economics of recycling: the logistics. Modern capitalist industry is, by and large, centralised and outsourced. Recycling is no exception. The logistics of modern recycling, especially plastic recycling, mire it in issues. First is accountability. If businesses, countries, municipalities can just send their recyclable waste to a foreign land rather than having to deal with it themselves, they have no incentive to change that policy. Modern infrastructure is set up so that it's just too convenient to pass the problem along for someone else to deal with. Recycling policy will not change while this is the case. Additionally, centralized, outsourced recycling removes the need for accountability on part of the government or company doing the recycling. It makes no direct difference to someone in the West, for example, if their recycling ends up actually being recycled or just ends up in the environment in a poor country on the other side of the globe. This is why many recycling facilities are just warehouses to store plastic waste. The cherry on top, however, is that this waste will be very difficult to recycle anyway, not because the plastics themselves can't be melted down into a blob, but because when you have plastics that come from all different locations all over the world, what tends to happen is that these get mixed into an unrecognisable mess of different plastic types of varying quality with no sure way of knowing their origin or history. As I have expressed in the past, I am an advocate of bringing industries back into the hands of the people, through decentralisation, localisation and democracy. I think this would benefit plastic recycling from a logistics point of view as well. There will be multiple benefits to decentralising and localising recycling. Chiefly, local recyclers would deal with plastic and other waste of primarily local origin. This makes recycling much more manageable of a process than the centralised chaos we have today. Managing local waste means the plastic origin, type, previous use and similar factors are much more traceable. A lower volume of waste aids in this traceability, but also allows for more close inspection, thorough cleaning and more precise and selective separation of different materials. Closer monitoring of waste streams and the operation as a whole would also result in a cleaner and less polluting recycling process. It's impossible to get everything though, even with a decentralized recycling system. Some plastics will inevitably get mixed, and we need to develop processes to deal with that. But breaking down the plastic waste problem into smaller, manageable parts could go a long way to solving the issue. Over the years, humanity has developed a whole list of polymers with various properties that suit different applications. Some are flexible and chemically resistant, like polyethylene. Some are soluble in a variety of solvents, like polystyrene or PVA, which make them ideal substrates for adhesives and glues. What we call acrylic, PMMA, is hard and brittle, but has a high optical clarity and is useful for optical fibres, and is also very soluble in organic solvents. In fact, acrylic is one of the most common binders for paint. Polyesters are cheap and easy to produce and can be made from bio-derived feedstocks and have a fairly decent set of properties. It's why most drinks bottles today are made of PET, polyethylene terephthalate. And there are many more different types of plastic. In fact, there are too many. What complicates this even more is the use of additives, most commonly colorants. What most people don't know is that there is almost no standardization for colorants used in plastics. Modern plastics either use inorganic colorants, that is things like metal oxides or charcoal in the case of black, or they use things called azo-dyes and azo-pigments, the key difference being that a dye is soluble in a suitable solvent, whereas a pigment is always going to be a tiny solid particle. Today, producers of plastics use a whole litany of different colorants, of different chemical compositions, some of which are proprietary. You won't find much information online about their synthesis or their properties. This presents an issue for plastic recycling because even if you have two green HDPE milk bottle tops, there's a chance they use two different additives to achieve the same colour. If mixing the additives has a negligible effect on the end product, then it would be okay to recycle them together. However, there is a chance they'll be incompatible. When it comes to the plastics themselves, we need to start talking about standardizing polymers and additives. in order to simplify the recycling process. If two different polymer materials have very similar properties in a way that one could be confused for the other, wouldn't it be simpler to phase out the one with inferior properties, if any? Wouldn't it make sense to have a standard set of colorants for each colour, and for those to be open sourced so that regular people could work towards developing recycling processes for these additives and their host plastics? I indeed think so. And finally, it's time to talk about the actual process of recycling itself. Assuming we implement all of the solutions I mentioned prior in this video, the process of recycling is the last thing we need to improve. But how? For things like metals and glass, things are pretty simple. Metals can be sorted and separated in a range of different ways. Some, like steel, are magnetic, while aluminium isn't, for example, so that's an easy way of separating the two. For more precious metals, chemical recycling has been the workhorse for some time now, as we see with the extraction of gold and others from e-waste. Metals are also infinitely recyclable, so long as you're careful not to mix alloys that would diminish the properties of the end material. With plastics, however, things are quite different. Each polymer has an approximate number of times it can be recycled before its properties diminish beyond usability, and we need to take account of that. This is why I think it would be a good idea to have a more holistic approach to waste management that factors in different grades of plastic and moreover implements processes for recycling materials that seem a little tricky today, like metallized plastic films. In the case of these films, we can use chemical methods to separate the metals, usually aluminium, from the plastic substrate. A holistic waste management system would also have systems for scanning polymers for their composition, systems to cleanly remove colorants and additives, and so on. But what happens when plastics get mixed, or are too far gone in terms of their degradation? Well, enter pyrolysis, an old technology with many new use cases. In essence, pyrolysis means heating organic matter in the absence of oxygen. And what this does is break down things like plastic and other things like algae or perhaps agricultural waste into something resembling a crude oil we currently dig out of the ground. This is called pyrolysis oil or bio-oil in the case of bio-derived feedstocks. There are other recycling methods implemented today, such as chemical recycling, where plastics are broken down into their monomers and made back into a plastic again, but this only applies to a select few polymers. Pyrolysis can apply to any type of plastic. The oil from this can be used as a form of energy storage as fuel, to smooth intermittencies, etc. This isn't perfectly green in a sense, because burning the matter will release some CO2, but this can be captured elsewhere, for example in the form of agriculture or in the manufacture of new, better plastics as a form of carbon storage. Pyrolysis can also be a handy tool in dealing with microplastics. Currently, recycling is just plain broken, but solutions exist or can be developed without much difficulty. Recycling shouldn't be the end-all be-all of waste management. Adaptation, repair, and reuse should take priority. However, it can be a powerful tool in creating new abundances from waste and can be instrumental in transitioning towards a circular economy. I hope this video informed you about the current pitfalls of recycling and what we can do to improve it. If you want to watch more video essay style videos surrounding sustainability, but also follow my more practical projects, then why not subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell. Sharing helps get this content out there. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all again soon.